Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now it's been 4 years since Volkswagen released their very first electric car on a bespoke platform, the ID3, and it's taken them all that time to produce a version that they dare to call sporty. But this £46,000 ID3 GTX Performance is apparently exactly that, and I quote, "With its spontaneous and superior power delivery, the new ID3 GTX Performance is the electric counterpart to our sporty compact icon, the Golf GTI Clubsport." Well, as someone who's done 15,000 miles in a Mk5 Golf GTI Clubsport, I think I'm particularly well placed to see if those bold claims are actually true. But before we see how this ID3 GTX Performance stacks up on paper, let me just remind you guys how you can support the channel. The easiest way as ever is simply to subscribe. We're still getting a lot of views from non-subscribers. It's bloody brilliant to get those views, but it'd be even more brilliant if you guys could subscribe as well, so I'm sure you know what to do by now. Okay, so according to a board member at Volkswagen, the ID3 GTX Performance is a rival for a car that I have a lot of love for, the 8 or 8.5 Golf GTI Clubsport. I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well. At the end of the video, we'll see how it drives in comparison to the Clubsport, but let's start off by seeing how it compares on paper. Before we start though, I should point out in other markets there is an ID3 GTX and an ID3 GTX Performance. In the UK we only get the Performance version, and that costs £46,315. That's about £3,500 more than the Mark 8.5 Clubsport. But there are two reasons not to turn off just yet. A, if you equalise the spec, they get a lot closer, and B, there are some crazy incentives for you to buy this car that make the Clubsport a lot more expensive. We'll talk about those later. It's rear-wheel drive like all ID3s, unusual for a Volkswagen though. It's got the most powerful battery ever fitted to a Volkswagen EV, 79 kilowatt hour. It's got a WLTP combined range of apparently 369 miles. It'll even do 441 in ideal conditions in an urban environment. Okay, on to performance then, where it matters. How does it compare with the Clubsport? So 326 metric horsepower, 545 newton meters of torque, compared to 300 metric horsepower, 420 newton meters of torque for the Clubsport. So an easy win for the ID3 GTX, but it's quite heavy. It's a nice round 2 tons, 2,000 kilograms versus 1,459 of the Clubsport. Picture it like this. If you imagine me and 4 Dwayne "The Rock" Johnsons sat in the Clubsport, it would then weigh the same amount as this ID3 GTX Performance empty. However, when it comes to 0 to 62 miles an hour acceleration, the ID3 GTX Performance is actually better than you might think. So it does it in 5.7 seconds compared to 5.6 for the Clubsport, which is quicker than even the Golf GTI Clubsport S, the Nürburgring record car, which does it in 5.8. So if you want an indication of why 0 to 62 time really has no reflection on the way a car performs in the real world, that's a good example. Now, power to weight ratio is really important as well. So it's 163 horsepower per tonne for the GTX Performance versus 205.6 for the Clubsport. So an easy win for the Clubsport. Not so easy when it comes to torque. 275 newton meters per tonne for the GTX Performance versus 287 newton meters per tonne for the Clubsport. So it might have a little bit less torque and it might be heavier, but actually the way it delivers it is much more immediate. Efficiency, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but it's nice to know what each mile costs in a petrol and electric car, and this car will cost you £3.58 to do 62 miles. So think about that. That's if you charge at home at a rate of 22.29 pence per kilowatt hour like I do. For the Clubsport, which does 37.4 miles per gallon, using super unleaded at £1.40 pence per litre, it's £10.55 to do 62 miles, so nearly 3 times the cost. So think about that. Okay, this ID3 GTX Performance, as tested, is 49,520 quid because it's got a few options we'll talk about in a bit. But let's talk about the standard spec, particularly in comparison to what the Clubsport gets. So there's no wheel upgrade available on this car. You only get the 20-inch Skagen wheels, sounds like an IKEA bookcase, and they come with Bridgestone Turanza 6 tyres. You get some cooled and heated and massaging seats, and they also have memory function. don't call them buckets because they're not very buckety, but they do have a little racy cutout, and they do have a fixed headrest as well. You get head-up display, which is optional on the Clubsport, and you get the Harman Kardon sound system and DCC, which again are optional. That comes to around 1,300 quid just for those two things. In addition to that, this car's got King's Red paintwork, which is £965. That's the only colour you can pay extra for on the ID3 GTX Performance. It's also got the Assistance Package Plus, which is £2,240. Now that might sound like a lot, but once you've used Travel Assist, which is semi-automated driving, which blends adaptive cruise control and lane assist together to make driving so much easier, then you probably won't ever not want to have it. I had that in the Golf R Estate I've just given back to Volkswagen UK, and it made the journey across to Germany so much easier. You also get the Area View 3D parking system and a few other bits and pieces. This car's also got the removable boot floor, 75 quid, and it came to me with a 3-pin Mode 2 charging cable, so I can plug it into a normal 3-pin plug, £240. Right now, let's have a look at the outside of the ID3 GTX Performance, starting with its dimensions. Now, to my surprise, the Golf is actually longer than the ID3 GTX Performance, but the Golf is narrower by 20mm. The Golf is also lower, and the Golf's wheelbase, the distance between the wheels, is a massive 150mm shorter. So this car should have really short overhangs, and it does. As I mentioned earlier, this car's in King's Red, which is a tribute to the classic GTIs. Apparently, it's also available in Moonstone Grey, black, silver, and white. Now, all ID3s have got a contrast roof, unless of course you go for black, but all the other ones have got this A-pillar and cant rail in a contrast colour. So it's possible with the ID3 GTX Performance, seeing as that is black, that if you spec a black one, it can be completely murdered out and black, which might actually look really cool. I don't think the configurator probably does it justice. Biggest, I suppose, visual difference with a normal ID3 is that this GTX Performance has got this big air intake down here with these diamond shapes in it. Interestingly, they're not the honeycomb pattern they use on the GTI Clubsport, so it's kind of telling that they haven't gone the whole hog on aping the Clubsport like some renders did before the car was released. It's got arrowhead daytime running lights, which are again unique to the GTX. LED matrix headlights are standard, and there is a light bar. Okay, the wheels then, 20-inch Skagen, come with 215 45 20-inch Bridgestone, so that's quite a narrow tyre for a 20, but that's the way with electric cars, because obviously the wider the tyre, the more drag. You can pay £450 extra and have 235 40 20s, and you can also have them diamond cut. So there are two options, both with a wider tyre. One diamond cuts the wheel as well for the same price. I'm not sure that's a good idea, because it does look like a very generic wheel once it's diamond cut, even though it's specific to GTX models. While we're down here, take in that sill, so it's gloss black and a little bit more racy than a normal sill. By the way, all the black bits on this GTX are gloss black, including the badge on the door there, which looks a lot better than the GTI one on the Golf. Maybe because it's black, maybe it's the shape or size of the car, I'm not sure, but it looks okay. Gloss black mirror casings are unique to the GTX as well, and 65% tints for the rear windows are standard. We've got LED rear lights. I'm always amazed by how big this spoiler is, but I suppose it's good for aerodynamics. So that's, you can put your whole hand up there, and that's not bigger for the GTX. And we've got GTX in black on the black tailgate, which doesn't look very visible, and you might actually want to, show off that you've got a GTX version. And then down here we have what Volkswagen call a diffuser, but I can't see much diffusing going on there. It's a gloss black inlay in a standard ID3 bumper, again with the diamond shape looking like a sort of fake vent. Obviously there are no exhaust pipes because we don't have an engine, boo-hoo. Okay, now let's have a look at the inside of this ID3 GTX Performance. Now, I've never been a big fan of ID3 interiors. I found it really odd that VW were trying to get people into electric cars, which was a hard sell. They might get them in the showroom to have a look around and then open the door and be put off by the interior. Well, I think Volkswagen knew they'd made a mistake, and there were some improvements in the facelift a couple of years ago, and there have actually been changes as well that tied in with the launch of the GTX models that apply across the rest of the range. that now make this interior, I can't believe I'm going to say this, better than the one in the Golf. So let's have a close look. You can make your own mind up. So we've got padded armrest there, nice red stitching there, which is a tribute apparently to the older GTIs. Piano black here. I'm not actually a fan of these switches and this knob, which feels quite cheap, and it doesn't work in the same way as a Golf. Door handle, I think is plastic. Not flock line door bins, but they do have a liner in them, so that looks better. This plastic's actually really good. No sill protection, which is a shame. Really boring floor mats, but they're decent quality. And actually the carpet looks better a bit than the one in the Golf, which I'm surprised about. Stainless pedals with play and pause, which might have been funny back in 2020. This plastic here, I'm not a big fan of at this kind of price point, but you don't really notice it much when you're in the car. Still says engine on the start button. We do not have an engine. Seats then. So this has got Interior Package Plus, which gets you these premium sport seats. I cannot bring myself to call them buckets, even though they look like them from this point upwards. But down here, the bolstering's nothing to write home about. They've got microfiber centres, which are made from recycled plastic. It actually looks really nice. Red stitching, GTX logo there in the cutout. Red piping down there. But most importantly, they're ergo active seats. So they're heated and cooled. They've got massage function. They've got memory function. And they're electric adjust fully with lumbar as well. And you have adjustable thigh support where you can keep the crumbs from your sandwiches. Let's get in, have a closer look. Now, another change for ID3 recently is that the shift has moved from the instrument cluster to its own stalk, and everything from this stalk is now on here. And this is actually the same for the new Passat and Tiguan. So they no longer have a shifter down here, which frees up a lot of space. I think they have electric parking brakes though, which this car doesn't have. It just does it all automatically, which is fine because it's so good now that you don't really need to touch the switch. But apparently, and according to the manuals, I thought this switch was for an emergency backup for the hydraulic braking system, so it doesn't appear you've got that now. Headlight switch is tucked in here now. And by the way, the stalk moved from here to there because when it was there, it was in the way of the massive new infotainment system that's come in just now with the launch of the GTX models. So we've got the MIB4, which has been in the Golf 8 facelift, new Passat as well, and I think new Tiguan, and it works really well. So there were loads of glitches with these cars when they came out. The fleet companies were saying, we do not want this car unless you do the software updates, but this out the box seems to be pretty spot on. And this screen I've lived with now for quite a few 100 miles in a few different cars, and it's just absolutely amazing. It's quick, the graphics are really easy to see. Yeah, it just makes driving so much easier. Not the case really with the instrument cluster. So we're used to big active info displays. This is pretty small and it's not really that configurable. And my eyesight's not that bad, but I do find some of the things on here a little bit small, so that's a bit disappointing. Also disappointing is that we've got exactly the same steering wheel that we had in the past. So it's a haptic with none of the changes that were introduced with the Golf R, because the Golf R has still got this steering wheel in facelift form, but they changed the way the cruise control operates. So instead of one press, you can hear it one or two for 1 mile an hour or 5 miles an hour or 10 kilometers per hour. They've now gone to set and res, which is the old way. That's a little bit disappointing. Famous heated steering wheel button people turned on by mistake. Well, actually, I haven't done that with this car, so maybe they've improved that. It's very much like a Clubsport steering wheel, just says GTX there. Plastic quality here is good. This is a little bit harder and scratchier, but actually looks good. The stitching is really nice, but I can't help thinking Skoda, because Skoda like to do all this now, and they pair it with like relatively cheap materials. The vents feel really good, really nice and weighty, just like on a Golf. Cup holder here, which is pretty nice, but it's not illuminated, and in the dark it's actually really hard to see where to put your cup, especially if you're not familiar with the car. A charging pad for your mobile phone, you can get two in there. USB-C's down there, lots of storage space which you can cover up like that. Black A-pillar, which is hard plastic, and a black headliner for the sporty look. And we've got the Harman Kardon sound system with 480 watts of power. Also, we've got 30 colour ambient lighting, and we've got the ID light, which is a strip of light at the bottom of the windscreen that communicates with you by changing colour and flashing. Right now, let's have a look in the back and see if all that extra wheelbase translates into more passenger space. Before we get in though, because keyless entry only works on the front door, you've got to do that to get in, which I think is a little bit cheap from Volkswagen. What isn't cheap is the door card. It looks totally like the one on the front doors, not been downgraded. In fact, it actually looks better because it's got this lovely Harman Kardon grille in the middle of it. Right, let's see how much knee room we've got. Oh yeah, not bad. So my knees are way off the seat back, which is in my driving position. I'm 6 foot tall. And if they were closer, it wouldn't be a problem because it's quite soft. So that's good. What is surprising is how little headroom there is. So I can feel my hair is touching the roof. And that's because the roof actually isn't particularly flat. It does curve round as it gets towards the doors. And sitting in the middle bit doesn't help either. It's actually touching there. So that's a bit strange. But yeah, for most people, it's perfectly fine. I should have mentioned I don't really like these armrests, and that's because they remind me of public transport. As I did mention, there aren't any climate controls for the rear seat passengers, which is a bit odd because that's been standard in cars for a long time. But you do have 2 USB-Cs at least and a bit of storage in here. Okay, now let's have a look in the boot. To open it, you do it with a Volkswagen badge, and it's very similar to a Golf. It's actually 4 litres bigger, and it's got a false floor as well, which is ideal for storing your cable, which we only really need to carry one. There's a bit more room down there as well. The seats do fold flat if you have this in the higher position, and they're a 40/60. Now surely you must be curious what's under the bonnet of an ID3, because there's no engine. So let's have a look. There's no telescopic strut, by the way, but it's not an issue with this car because you shouldn't really need to open it. That's an interesting structure to the lid. So yeah, even though there's a coolant tank, there's no engine. That's sort of the airbox, screen wash filler, fuses, a normal sort of 12 volt battery. Yeah, that's it. And speaking of battery, now let's talk about charging the ID3, because obviously that's a big part of ownership. Okay, so I'm charging this ID3 with this cable that's got a 3-pin plug. On the end of it goes to a normal household socket. I wouldn't recommend you do that if you own an ID3. Get yourself a wall box, plug it in every night, get to 80% charge, roughly 300 miles range. Set the timer on the heater to warm the cabinet before you actually get into it, which also defrosts all the windows if it's been icy. And you can't do that in a Clubsport. It's got a massive battery, 79 kilowatt hour, biggest VW have ever fitted, and it takes 8.5 hours to charge it to 100% using an 11 kilowatt AC charger. But you can charge it from 10% to 80% in just 26 minutes if you use the maximum power of 185 kilowatts via a DC charger, the kind of charger you find at motorway services. Problem with using those is that they can be really expensive. I'm currently charging from home using my normal Octopus Energy tariff of 22.29 pence per kilowatt hour, and that means I can do 157 miles on £10 worth of electricity. If you compare that with an internal combustion engine car that does 45 mpg at £1.35 pence per litre, you get half the distance for your £10 worth of fuel. And I'm not even charging at the cheapest rate. Octopus and other energy suppliers offer electric car owners an overnight tariff where electricity is not in so much demand, where it would be much, much less than that. And I've got to say, it's a great feeling, even the few miles I've done in this car that's going back after a week, to not have to pay VAT and fuel duty to drive. But don't forget, depreciation is the biggest cost of owning a car, and that will make fuel savings pretty much insignificant when it comes to the way EVs lose money. But the good news is, if you buy on a PCP, well, you're immune to depreciation. If the car loses more money than predicted, well, just give it back to Volkswagen. It's their problem to deal with. Okay, now let's see how the predicted range of this ID3 translates into reality in a real world test. Well, welcome to this real-world ID3 GTX Performance range test. So I've got to go to Westbury in Wiltshire, and Waze says it's 82.5 miles. I can go other ways, but I won't have the range for that because in total I've got 201 miles. So there should be some in reserve. What's that, about 35 miles spare? Not an awful lot really. I might use the air conditioning to demist the car, I might use the wipers, might use the lights, might use the heated seats. It's all going to affect that. So let's see how we get on. I do have a charging cable with me if I need to use it and a PodPoint app, but hopefully not. I mean, why should I? I've got 35 miles in reserve. So let's get on the road and see how this pans out. Maybe I should have packed a toothbrush and a spare pair of pants. Okay, we're near Northleach now. We've used about 39 miles of range to do 35.5 miles, so it's not way off. And maybe if we get some freer moving traffic up to about 55, it'll pick up a bit, we'll see. But really, I don't want to get to my destination and find I've got no less than 100 miles range, because I won't be able to get back on that, and I'll probably have my headlights on the way back as well, which will reduce that range even more. So it's still all to play for. Okay, I'm pretty much at my destination. I've done 79 miles and I've got 122 range left, so that's pretty much exactly bang on what it predicted. Importantly, 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour is a bit like the miles per gallon, and that's really good. That equates to about £6 per 100 miles. Back in the day, if you had a good diesel, you'd do 10 quid per 100 miles. This is a fair bit better, so that's good. When we started, it was below 3.5, so we've had a faster run after sort of halfway, and it shows that on there. So yeah, now I just need to get home. Okay, well, I got home and 34 miles left in the tank, 162 miles covered. So it should have said 196 when I left. Originally it said 201, so it's slightly under, which is, you know, it's pretty accurate. But this journey's been so efficient, going down the Foss Way, doing between 40 and 60 miles an hour all the way, and headlights on the way back, fair enough, but I didn't have the heated seats on, didn't have the heated rear window on, hardly had the wipers on. You couldn't get a more efficient journey, and still it was under. So it does worry me what it'd be like in the real world with people in and luggage in and extra weight to carry around. But yeah, I'm home, so that's what matters. Now I just want to show how easy it is to get in and drive the ID3. So it's keyless entry. Shut the door, foot on brake, select drive, no need to worry about parking brake, and off you go. Obviously don't forget your seatbelt. So the shifter's worth talking about just quickly. It's really intuitive. Forward is for drive, and twist it back towards you is for reverse. Also, you will want to drive with brake energy recuperation at the maximum, so you need to go to drive and then forward again to go into B mode. We've got area view that makes manoeuvring such a big car so much easier, and I think the only reason they've incorporated it now into the Golf and the ID3 is because the screen is so big you can actually see things clearly enough for it to be safe. Now if you've never driven an electric car, go and drive one. You will be amazed how they drive if you're driving normally. They're really quiet because there's no combustion process. Tiny bit of tyre noise, tiny bit of wind noise. The other thing is they've got loads of torque. There's no revving up an engine and fuel being burnt and exhaust gas through a turbo. It's just instant. I mean, this is 30 to 50. That's it. In the wet, the ESC light is on quite a lot, but it still manages to get you going really efficiently because all the weight's on the back wheels, it's not on the front, so it's not scrabbling as you accelerate. So yeah, you probably won't even notice the ESC light, to be perfectly honest. Let's just talk about the driving modes then. So we've got Eco, Comfort, Sport, Individual. This car's got a DCC as standard, so you can fiddle with the DCC more than the fixed driving modes allow you. So there's 3 clicks north of Sport to be even firmer, and there's 3 clicks south of Comfort, and to be honest, I think in the UK you'll be going south of Comfort more than you'll be going north of Sport, because Sport's really firm. Comfort is just about okay. Another good thing about this car, which is part of the Assistance Package Plus, is that we've got travel assist. So this is semi-autonomous driving. I had it in the 8.5R. I drove to Germany and I kind of got addicted to it, because all you basically need to do is set the cruise. It keeps the car in lane much better than lane assist does, and it also uses the speed limits to speed up and slow down the car. Now, I don't normally like that, but when it works really well. Like, it's slowing the car down to 30. Now, it will tell you to put your hands on the steering wheel, because it's not really designed for hands-free driving. One thing I should point out is that this car, when I drove it at about 9 degrees ambient temperature, it didn't feel particularly warm in here at 22 degrees, which is normally my happy temperature, whatever the weather's doing. And I do wonder if that's because this car doesn't have a heat pump. A heat pump will scavenge a lot of heat from the battery and more efficiently heat the cabin, and without that you do lose a bit of range. So definitely spec that. So yeah, in everyday life it's a really easy car to live with. But is it sporty? Well, let's talk about the brakes first. If you put it in the high recuperation mode, when you actually do use the brakes, they still feel natural, and I think things must have progressed here, because a lot of cars that recuperate energy from the braking do not feel natural. I've never felt this car with anything other than natural. I've not buried the brakes deeply until today, because I've been driving efficiently, but I can tell you, the more you press the pedal, the more they stop, and that's quite unusual in a modern car. So that's good. Obviously, there's no gearbox to talk about. The steering is a little bit glassy because it's designed for almost autonomous driving. That's its priority. It's not designed really to give you feel, but when you lean on the tyres, there is a lot of grip there, so you soon learn to trust it. It's rear-wheel drive, which I think I mentioned before, and you can get into the ESC system really easily with this new infotainment system. Put it in ESC Sport, and you will feel the rear tyres helping you round corners quite a lot. It corners better than you thought it would do for 2 tons, really, thanks to DCC, I'm sure. And it rides okay as long as you're in comfort mode or softer. And of course, it's really quick, and almost unnervingly quick. What I don't particularly like about this kind of speed is that in the back of your mind there's something telling you that yes, this is all very good, but you've just accelerated 2 tons of metal to that whatever speed you've accelerated to, and you're going to have to stop it, and it might have to be a sudden stop if something happens in front of you, and I'm not sure the brakes are really up to the performance. So let's just do a stop. Yeah, okay, they're pretty good, but I don't think they're any better than a Clubsport, which doesn't seem to have that sort of relentless level of acceleration. Let's quickly talk about range now. You've seen in the real world range test that it just about gave you what it's quoted when it came to range. That was when driving pretty sedately on a road with a higher speed of 60 miles an hour. On the motorways, it does lose a lot more range than you would expect at motorway kind of speeds. But the other thing with this car that's not such an issue with other ID3s is that if you want to drive it and use all that performance, you're going to munch through range even more quickly. And because of that, I would suggest that if you're going to do a 150 mile journey, that you allow 300. Part of that extra 150 is to allow not just for you enjoying yourself, but also for the fact that it won't do the range that it quotes if you use the heated seats, the headlights, the wipers, and some of the other electrical consumers that this car's got. But luckily, it's got a big enough battery that if you charge it regularly, there shouldn't be a problem. You shouldn't have range anxiety. And if the worst comes to the worst, you can rapid charge it when you're away from home. But once you get into driving it, it's a real buzz. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's actually a surprisingly enjoyable car to drive, but in a very different way to a GTI Clubsport. But there is still a reason to buy it over the GTI Clubsport. Now this is one thing you can't do in a Clubsport. Have a musical backside. But that's no reason to buy the GTX Performance over the Clubsport. The reason is the monthly payments. It looks like Volkswagen are throwing the book at the ID3s to boost flagging sales. How else can a car that costs £3.5 more, going by its RRP, and loses more money over the finance term, be 90 quid a month cheaper to finance? And don't forget, the ID3 GTX Performance basic spec is better than the Clubsport's basic spec. You get DCC, you get the bigger wheels, head-up display, Harman Kardon, nicer seats. The equivalent Cupra Born, same battery, same power, is £1 more per month. But because it loses more money, they've made that up by giving the cars a greater deposit contribution, so £4.5 versus £3,950 of the ID3. And what is actually really cool about the Cupra Born is there's now, I mean, this is how desperate they are, you can actually take out the finance, have the car, but if you don't like it after 100 days, you can just give it back and walk away. Okay, so it's pretty clear that the ID3 GTX Performance, which is very nice to drive, is not as sporty as the Clubsport. The easiest way to think of it is, what would you rather drive on track? The Golf GTI Clubsport, out the box, is on the pace on track. I've driven mine, it was brilliant. The ID3 GTX Performance, I've not driven it on track, but I can imagine 2 tons and 215 section eco-ish tyres is not a good combination. And the brakes, whilst they do look quite big, they're not really designed for heavy braking applications, not least because they've got the energy recuperation function when you're on the road, which means you hardly use them. But is it a better daily driver? Well, I think it might well be. There are lots of benefits to electric cars. They're quieter, the weight distribution is better, you can warm them up in the mornings. But the biggest draw for me is how attractive the finance is. I had no idea VW were doing these kind of deals. Plus, I've forgotten how cheap it is per mile. And you have to bear in mind, that's now. So electricity is quite high compared to fuel. Fuel's come down, electricity's gone up. If petrol goes up to £1.50 per litre, the savings will be even bigger to run an electric car. The only thing that would hesitate me going for the ID3 GTX Performance is the aforementioned Cupra Born. I've got to admit, I don't like the exterior looks of either of them, but I prefer the Born. It looks a little bit racier, even though the front of it looks like a bulldog chewing a wasp, and it is nicer inside. But you do have to watch out for the spec on the Cupra, because it misses things that this car gets as standard, such as dynamic chassis control, which is really important. But then again, it is a little bit cheaper, so I think equaliser spec, it shouldn't be too different. Whichever one you go for, though, you're going to save about £90 per month over the Clubsport, which amounts to about £3,000 over the 3-year term. And what can you buy for £3,000? It's not a lot of money in the modern world, but it will still buy you a pretty decent Mk5 Golf GTI, so you can have proper GTI thrills, one of the best GTIs. Now, before I sign off, I just want to say that when the ID3 came out in 2020, it was a bit of a shitstorm for Volkswagen. The dealerships were full of them. Fleet companies were saying you need to do software updates before we're going to give them to customers. And yeah, it just didn't work out very well. I'm pleased to report 4 years on, they finally sorted it. Everything has worked perfectly, and it now actually feels like a Volkswagen. As ever, guys, thanks for watching this Volks Wizard video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.